Hello, and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown, and I'm the editor at Guns on Pegs. As usual, I'm joined by Chris Horn, managing director of Guns on Pegs. Chris, how's it going? We've both been away on holiday.
We have. It's calm before the storm, though, George, isn't it?
It is. And I should hasten to add, not together. We haven't been on holiday together.
There'd be a bonding session, team bonding session. No, we haven't. But it's kind of, this is a good time to go away, though, isn't it? I don't know about others who work in the shooting world. I mean, obviously, unless you get like grouse invites coming out your ears, just getting away before the start of partridge season is a good time.
Yeah, definitely.
I went to Wales for 3 days, West Wales. That was my summer holiday this year. Which is, I went to the Wool Museum. The Wool Museum is good, actually. If any of your listeners ever find themselves shooting with Charles Grisdale, who I think is on your books, they should definitely make a bit of a detour to the Wool Museum. So it's not far away, and it's pretty interesting.
So if you don't already know who our guest today is, you've got to guess on the basis of his voice and the fact that he goes to the Wool Museum in Wales for his summer holiday. For those that don't know, the chat we just heard is we're welcoming back. Actually, we've only ever had two people on the podcast twice, so you're an elite club, and you deserve your return today, having recently written, I must say, a fabulous book titled One Last Song. We're going to come on to that a lot in a bit.
In search of one last song.
In search of one last song. I'm sorry. Yeah,
it's okay.
But outside of writing that book, of course, you are editor of Shooting Times, as well as being a contributor to many different magazines, Spectator, Critic, many other journals. You've got an incredibly knowledgeable head on some somewhat young shoulders.
Getting older. I'm catching you up. I don't think age quite works like that.
A very warm welcome to today's guest, Patrick Galbraith.
Thank you. Who was your second returnee?
So we didn't properly intro him because of our mess up on the live pod, but it was Ben Randall.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I don't think that really counts either. I think just standing there making cock jokes does it.
That wasn't me, by the way. That was Ben Randall, I assume. Unless I've very much forgotten the last time I was on the. I was that drunk.
It was a rather chaotic live podcast, which was a good laugh. No, it's really good to have you back, Patrick. And having sort of been involved in this journey of this book, because we talk a lot on text, it's been fascinating to then read the book and know. Just remember the time that you were camping on, in that cave, and down on the foreshore, wherever it was, and just sort of be a part of that journey. And then
was it on Uist? Yeah, listening for corncrakes.
Yeah, exactly. And
on a kind of cut-off island. I probably was relying on you more emotionally then than you actually realised when I was there. And Marcus Janssen of Schoffel fame, who was giving me all sorts of. He said to me, I can't remember. It was March. I think it was March or April. And he was sort of asking me what kit I had with me. And he said, by 3:00 in the morning, you're really going to be fucking freezing. And at 3:00 in the morning, I was really, really dying out there.
I remember at the time thinking you're absolutely nuts. But now, having read your book, it all makes sense. I mean, I don't think it quite gets across the hard yards you put in to create that content. But amazing effort.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing about, I think when you're writing something, when you're writing anything, you sort of have to commit yourself to to getting that story at all costs and doing a topic justice at all costs. And sometimes you do end up sort of becoming slightly mad almost, the lengths that you go to join the pieces together. But, I think when you look back on it, hopefully when you've created a piece of work like that, you feel it's worth it.
So we're jumping ahead slightly because we're going to talk about this in a bit, but just so that we don't lose everyone completely, just give people a very quick insight into what this book is about.
Yeah, so this book is, to give it its full title, is called In Search of One Last Song, Britain's Disappearing Birds and the People Trying to Save Them. And I think I became very aware. People often ask, where did the idea come from? And I think when I was editing Shooting Times, really, I sort of became aware of two things, one of which was the conflict around conservation, and the other thing was how much sort of deep knowledge, and that's not actually my term. There's a writer called Adam Nicholson, who some of your listeners will know, I'm sure, who in reviewing the book talked about this thing, deep knowledge. And I sort of became aware that, there were these people out there, keepers, shepherds, hedge layers, thatchers, who'd sort of spent their whole life living alongside birds that are disappearing. And I think all too often, we don't ask them sort of what they think, sort of both what those birds mean to them and how we can try and sort of fight for their future. So that's what I wanted to do. So it was a real kind of roundabout journey from Orkney to West Wales, talking to all sorts of people, and it was fascinating.
Well, let's get into that in a bit. But as everyone knows, we've got a whole load of correspondence. We're going to put you to some work. But before we do that, George, your favourite segment?
Yes, it's always my favourite segment because I like having a drink on a Wednesday afternoon. So, Patrick, why don't you tell us what's that you're drinking?
So I was actually saying just before to these guys, just before we went live, that I've got a kind of like Campari. Essentially what happened was I lost my headphones for this, which is necessary for a podcast. And I looked out the window and my neighbor is sitting on the wall smoking a spliff. And he's a really nice old guy. But if you go out there, you commit yourself to like a 45-minute conversation. So I thought, fuck, I don't want to go out there. I'll just see what I can make. So I had some cherry juice and some Campari and some lemons and some ice. So I decided to make a cocktail. But I then realized I didn't have my headphones. So I had to go to the shop anyway. So I got stuck talking to this guy while he was mid-spliff. But anyway, it's this Campari cocktail of no name, but I'll make it again. It's good.
Cherry, lemon, Campari.
And some sparkling water, if any, and some mint, actually. Some mint, and a bit of lemon. Yeah, it's good. I recommend it.
I'm trying to imagine the taste.
I mean, it should definitely be called One Last Cocktail, shouldn't it?
Well, I hope there's going to be more than this. I've got to,
It's probably the last time anyone's going to make it. And you resisted the temptation to join this guy with his spliff, obviously, for the sake of coherent conversation.
Yeah. No, he's a very nice guy, actually. But yeah, he's always out there. And the police sometimes stop to speak to him because he knows exactly what's going on in the area, but they never bring up his cannabis use with him. So it's a kind of, I don't know. It's a possibly shouldn't say that. I've got Camberwell police on, coming round, but no, it seems to be a symbiotic relationship of sorts.
He's the equivalent in your book of the sort of people who know about their birds in their part of the world. For sort of Camberwell social, so neighbourhood watch, isn't it?
Exactly.
Amazing.
Maybe that's the next book. What are you guys? You look like you're having some sherry or something there, George. Or maybe that's just the glass.
Well, no, actually, on the last podcast that we did, I promised that this time, instead of having single malt Scotch whiskey, I'd have a glass of rosé just to change things up a bit. And there was a bit of a hairy moment where because I only came back from holiday yesterday, I thought maybe I didn't have any in the fridge. But happily, yes, I have got a nice...
That is a hairy moment when you look in the fridge and you've not got any rosé.
Yeah. So I've got a Provençal rosé bought from that very fine wine merchant Waitrose and Co. And yeah, it's very nice, very enjoyable. It's been absolutely hosing it down with rain here all day today, so it feels a bit weird to be drinking rosé rather than Scotch. But
rosé in the rain on a Wednesday.
Yeah. Yeah. But a promise is a promise.
It might be raining, but it is so muggy. I was in London this morning for a Country Food Trust trustees meeting, and I was running back to the tube because I was worried I was going to be late for this. And oh my God, it's warm. So I've gone for a glass of white wine, cold white wine, which, having done that journey back, is very welcome. And having just been to Beaune in France, couldn't be more of an English pronunciation.
Beaune.
Beaune. But wine's a bit of a passion of mine. I've actually got something quite cheap and cheerful, which is an Aligoté. And there's not many. So Aligoté is a type of grape, and they do grow a little bit of it in a very much dominated Chardonnay region around there. And it's about, I think I paid €10 a bottle because the winemaker, owned the Airbnb we were staying in, and it's an absolute winner. So it's one of those ones you find and then you go, brilliant, I'm stocking up. So we filled up every last space in the car with this and some of this red. Drove home, and the dog had less space on the way back than it did on the way there, and it's perfect.
Did I tell you about that? My parents went on a booze buying trip to France once when they had a big kind of 7-seater people carrier. It was back when we were kids, and the car broke down en route from Burgundy to Calais, so they called in the recovery service and they hitched it up, and off they went to the ferry. But they stopped en route. They made the guy stop to buy a corkscrew, and my parents and their friends just sat in the car being towed along, getting absolutely blotto on all the wine they bought. I don't know if I can broadcast that. They might not thank me for it, but I thought I'd share it with you guys anyway.
Presumably you've got to drink the right amount, because when the ferry pulls in the other side, you've got to make sure you're then sober enough to get home. Actually, you're not far.
Well, it had to be towed off at the other end, and then they just parked it and got a taxi home.
Winner.
And the car's still there to this day. If you've ever seen that, yeah.
It's got loads of wine.
Toyota Previa in
I like the fact that we've both gone for wine, George. This is a new sort of sophisticated us.
Hey, yeah, I think. I mean, I've always had a sophisticated drink. Of course, it's the lack of supermarket lager that's changed.
I don't know. Maybe.
Right. So, Patrick, our first listener correspondence section is called "Whose Bird Is It Anyway?" and it's where we ask our listeners to send in their shooting quandaries and queries and questions, and we try and help them out. So this one comes from somebody I've decided to call Lazarus, and he says, I recently came across your podcast, and it's a great listen for someone who's new to the world of shooting. I'm finding it both educational and entertaining, so keep up the good work. When I say new to shooting, I do mean very new. It's probably a midlife crisis and the reevaluation of life during the pandemic, but I've started to tick things off my bucket list. This year, I started shooting lessons, and whilst only on the clays at the moment, I'm very keen to eventually go game shooting. My quandary is around telling your family and friends that you're embarking on this new adventure. The challenge is that instinctively, my family and friends are very skeptical of shooting. The portrayal of guns in the media, whether it's US gun culture or recent gun crimes in the UK, does not help that view. Plus, game shooting tends to be seen as an elitist activity from a bygone era. So the dilemma is very simple. Should I say anything about shooting and what I'm up to, or should I keep a low profile and not really say anything?
I actually had when I took up BMX riding mid pandemic. I actually had a very similar thing. But I was having dinner with my girlfriend's father and some of his friends, and he brought up this BMX riding, and he said that really it was quite pathetic, and I said to him, but not as pathetic as that model aeroplane building that you did. He went completely mental, like it was, but he does do that, and I do my BMX, and we both get a lot of pleasure from it. So I think what I'm saying is that, if it means a lot to you and you enjoy it, then you've just got to run with it and educate people about the virtues of shooting, as I educate people about the virtues of BMX.
I love how you've likened BMX to this dilemma.
They are inherently very similar, though, obviously.
I mean, does BMX have conservation issues and sustainability problems?
The big threat to BMX, as you'll know, is the affordability of skateboard, and also the fact that skateboard is seen as slightly cooler. I don't know whether that's similar to fishing and shooting, or whether there's no comparison to be made at all. But
do you get like anti BMXs running across?
Yeah, you definitely do. Like it's all linked up with no skating and all that kind of
stuff. Yeah. But I think, what I would say genuinely is that it's often surprising, actually, about how people. Maybe talk about this a little bit later, about how people aren't as anti-shooting as one thinks, and that everybody has an in. So, I've got a lot of friends who aren't really very keen on shooting, but they are very keen on food. So, sort of game ends up being, I had a lunch party like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were eating muntjac, and nobody there shot, actually, apart from me, but everybody was really keen on the muntjac, and a lot of people knew quite a lot about deer as an ecological issue. So yeah, I think it's good to just be out there, and it raises interesting talking points for sure.
Yeah, I think the obvious wins are, well, if you're shooting game and it's ending up on the table, you've got the life of that bird from start to finish, as opposed to, say, a chicken. You've got the fact that the meat is lean. You've got the social, economic, conservation benefits of that right the way through. it's something to be hugely proud of. But I do know what you mean. This guy, it is quite nice to have. I often, I'm sure we all do, find ourselves in sort of, drinks party conversation with like a distant cousin of your wife or something, and find yourself in, right, justify your existence, boy, type scenario. And you do need these sort of quick things to reel off, just to remind people, actually, hold on a second, I feel odd you questioning what I do, but no, this is the reason.
Yeah, I mean, I had exactly that situation on the plane on the way to Spain. I was sitting next to a guy, and he got talking and asked what I did, and I'm always a bit nervous in those situations, and sometimes I just say I'm a journalist and try and leave it at that. But this guy, I decided, for whatever reason, I might have had a beer, that I was gonna go full in, and said, yeah, I write about shooting and fishing and that kind of stuff. And he went, oh, that's really interesting. And about 15 minutes later revealed that he was a vegetarian. I thought, oh God. But, he was completely, open to game shooting as, he wasn't opposed to it in any way, which was really interesting.
Often vegetarians and vegans are sort of more receptive to the idea of hunting food, as it were, than other people, because they've often thought a lot about what they eat and why they do that. I mean, there are some people who are just kind of like slightly puritanical about the whole thing. But, lots of my friends who are vegan and vegetarian, I have lots of friends who are vegan and vegetarian, are into the idea of sustainable eating. And they do recognize that sort of game can be part of that. And actually, when we start asking ourselves questions about, well, how sustainable is this game that we've harvested, from this shoot, then I think, that's quite interesting and leads you to quite interesting places in terms of thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I do want to come back to that exact point, actually. But I think that for this guy here, to sort of summarize for him, he really shouldn't be worried or ashamed. I think the Countryside Alliance always use an argument that a couple of dead pheasants versus 400 dead pheasants is kind of the same thing. You're either against that or you're okay with it. It doesn't really matter how many. So it's not about bag size or that sort of thing. It's just the idea of going shooting. So be proud of what you do, and just know exactly what Patrick says, that most people simply don't care. They're just not really knowledgeable on it yet. So share with them the knowledge that you've built and go from there. And if they really got an issue with it, you'll probably find you've got no hope anyway.
Very true. And I also, on the sort of elitist activity thing, I mean, there is an element of that, isn't it? But I think partly that's part of the appeal sometimes, is the silly clothes and the tradition and all the rest of it. But would it be absolutely terrible of me to say that he should get them to listen to the Guns on Pegs podcast and read the Shooting Times and get a real feel for what shooting's actually all about?
It's really funny. I mean, I like... one of the things I enjoy about field sports is the sort of cultural and social diversity that comes with it. I mean, and I mean this completely genuinely, that, in my local park, there are lots of people who fish there for carp. There's a big carp fishing scene, and that is a world away from your average field reader and possibly your average Guns on Peg user. I was down in Wales shooting last week, and there were lots of Welsh-speaking beaters and pickers up there. And there's, so it's shooting's a pretty diverse and eclectic place, really. We had a very good piece in Shooting Times recently on that, on how diverse and welcoming is shooting.
Yeah, I actually read that piece. I thought it was a very, very good piece. And you're right, welcoming is something that the shooting community always will be. And I think that's partly because we feel like we need friends and we just want to bring more and more people in. And diversity is maybe a slightly different kettle of fish, but something that's improving all the time.
And I'd say shooting is more welcoming than it's ever been, in my experience. And I think it's one of our massive plus points. I love it, actually, when you're out on days and you always find people swarm towards someone who's quite new, really trying to sort of get them excited and get them involved. And it's epic, actually.
Yeah, and like if you've ever seen anybody shoot their first bird on a driven day, the joy that everybody who's out on that day shows, and the congratulations, and everybody from the person who invited them to the lowliest beater, the most junior beater, everybody is thrilled for them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just crack on, I think is the general response there. Use the food and the sustainability, and don't be ashamed of wanting to get into game shooting, and give it a go. That's our general message there, I think, isn't it?
Because once you're in, there's no going back. You're hooked.
Indeed. Right, let's move on. Chris, have we got an unpopular opinion this week?
We have, and this one comes from someone that George has called Luigi, and you're going to see why George has called him Luigi in a second. He writes, my unpopular opinion is that new London best guns are no longer the best guns that money can buy. I feel that the price tag reflects the cost of operating a premises in London and producing a hand-built gun at a snail's pace, rather than costing X because it is the best gun that money can buy. London guns probably were the best guns that money could buy in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but is this really still the case? Is the current business model and the inherent inefficiencies the reason that a London gun costs so much? I'm not even sure how much is done by hand in London anymore, and is hand-built better or best in this day and age? Are Boss, Purdey and Holland et al. At the top of the tree anymore? For example, if you want the best engraving or best timber, would you get better from the likes of Perazzi, Krieghoff, Beretta, Piotti, or maybe even the Blaser Custom Shop? Don't get me wrong, I've always dreamed of walking in the door of Boss & Co. to order my new pair of guns in the morning and going across to Wesley Richards or Rigby's for a new rifle after lunch. But I now feel that if I was ever in such a financial position, that my money would be better spent on the continent rather than in London. Debate. Patrick, you were sitting at lunch the other day with Franco Beretta, weren't you?
We were actually having a pastry. It was the morning. We were having a coffee and a pastry.
I do apologise.
It was meant to be lunch, but he turned up early, funnily enough, and then summoned me. But I said to him essentially just that, but in slightly fewer words. Don't you think that London gun makers haven't innovated, and essentially you get the same gun now as you got 100 years ago? And he said 100%. And what he wants to do with Holland & Holland is to innovate. Is to be bold and to do what Beretta have done, really.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Beretta bought Holland & Holland.
Yeah. So Beretta bought Holland & Holland. And I think it's a really exciting time for Hollands to see what they come up with. So I think absolutely, and I think people are getting kind of cannier and cannier, and they are realizing that actually, a Perazzi is a hell of a gun, and you can get 8 Perazzis for the cost of a Holland & Holland. So so I think we need to hold those guys to account and say, come on, come up with the goods. What are you going to do that's exciting?
Can I just add a little bit of info? Because I think Luigi here, who I think George is obviously just assuming is Italian and has a preference, but I think Luigi here might be confused by the term best gun. And so for anyone else, a best gun is simply what the London gun makers refer to as their best item. So it doesn't mean that they think these are the best guns, but for example, a Holland & Holland Royal is what they call a best gun, and anything other at Purdey than a Sporter or a trigger plate is a best gun. And Boss, their strapline is makers of best guns only, and that just simply means that they don't have any others. They just make essentially bespoke custom guns. So that's what they mean by best guns. And you can have like a pair of best guns. Well, doesn't mean they're the best, but it does obviously come from back in the day when these were just simply the best, and there was no argument about it. I suppose the argument now is machine made better than handmade, and good luck doing that in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's people I know who go around with Purdy's and a screwdriver for when the gun breaks down. That is, I used to have a very cheap 1980s Porsche, and when it worked, it was a delight. When I used to have to stay the night at a service station because it didn't work and it was breaking down, it wasn't such a delight. So, for my money, the likes of a Blaser or Perazzi is a hell of a piece of kit.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting question about what your definition of best is as well, and if you mean most reliable and most exactingly, most precision made and all that kind of thing, then maybe they're not. But we ask a question in the census, don't we, Chris, about if you had infinite money, who would you get to build you a gun? And it is still the case that Purdey come in at top, Holland & Holland in second place, Beretta in third, interestingly.
Really, that is interesting.
And then
Beretta do make some very nice guns.
Their SO10s and SO6s are beautiful.
And then Boss and then Boss at fourth in fourth. So your definition of best is a completely individual thing, and for some people, having that handmade, completely bespoke thing using ancient techniques is what they value the most. In fact, apparently for most people, I guess it's like if you wanted a really, really, really accurate watch, you wouldn't buy a Rolex, would you? You'd get something space age and digital,
like Casio,
a Casio or an Apple Watch. Yeah,
exactly. But I do think, and I don't know. I mean, this is sort of pretty hard to prove this one way or the other. But I think we are in an age of sort of where functionality and reliability is sort of seen as attractive. So, I think like Audi, for example, is going through a real moment at the moment. And if you look at like just kit as well, in terms of the clothing that we wear and things, people want stuff that really works. And I mean, you look at the likes of Shuffle are doing really well with technical kit that 15 years ago people wouldn't have worn in the field.
Yeah, very true.
So, and I think that's leached. I think the Scandinavian stuff, particularly, I mean, 5 years ago, I went on a moose hunt in Scandinavia.
Oh, yes. You spoke about that on our last podcast.
Did I? I mean, it stayed with me, just freezing my balls off. And I was looking at the kit these guys had. But, we use a lot of their kit now. So it's quite interesting how Keeler doing so well and Sealand doing so well and Perazzi doing so well.
Do you think that's because if you spend all this money on an ever increasing price of a day's shooting, you just don't want something else letting you down? You want to be comfortable, warm. You want to have a gun that's not going to go bang, click type thing,
I think so, but also people want to shoot well. And I think that's a bit of a new thing. So like, the number of like 80-year-olds I know who are like, oh, I've never had a shooting lesson. I would never do that. And you think, and you spent, 70 years shooting like shit kind of thing. Whereas now people who take it up, they want to shoot well, and as you say, I think that's partly because shooting's so expensive. So I don't know, it's really interesting.
But also, I think that people who come into game shooting through clay shooting, where being accurate is a super important thing, then then they want to be accurate when they're shooting game as well.
Also, I think there's an ethical thing as well there. Like I think people want to kill birds efficiently and effectively nowadays, which you do to a greater degree with a gun that fits you.
But bringing it back to this argument, though, right at the top of the game, obviously a Purdy, Holland, whatever, like they're going to be as good as anything else. The difference really is...
They are, but what I would just say is that a lot of people are knocking about with like inherited Purdys or inherited Hollands. And like, fine if you go and get the gun fitted for you sort of thing. But, if your granddad was a tiny little man and you're a huge bloke using your grand, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a bit weird. You don't wear your granddad's boxer shorts or his trousers. So, because they wouldn't fit you. So,
yeah.
My grandfather's a very well-endowed man. I wouldn't wear his boxer shorts. That's nonsense. I've got no idea.
I think the point I've always made when it comes to Purdys and Hollands is jewellery. It's got nothing to do with guns at the end of the day. If you just wanted a gun, you'd go and buy like a Beretta Silver Pigeon or a Browning 525. Like that's what, if you just go like your average mate who pops out going, so I want a new over and under, my budget's like 1,500 quid. You're like, right, well, you've got an option of two. But at this level, it's got nothing to do with the idea that it's got a trigger and it goes bang. It's everything to do about the feeling it gives you when you buy it. And therefore, whether it's machine made, hand built, got this engraver or standard engraving or laser engraved or whatever, it's down to what you like. And it's the same with watches. And so I think that this is just this guy's opinion. I'd say it is unpopular based on the census results, which everyone wants a Holland or a Purdy. But on that basis, he's just shared his opinion. There's lots of other people that will agree with him, and there's tons that won't.
Yes, very true. And actually, interestingly, fifth place is Longthorn. So it's not all about handmade stuff. Some people really value that high tech thing, and if you can do high tech with a flourish, then you're on to...
And be British in their case. That's got to be why they're in there at that position.
Well, yeah, nearly all the others in there are, in the top 10 are British. There's just we've got Perazzi at 7, Beretta at 3, and Browning at 6. So yeah, 6 out of
the big names plus British names or makers.
So yeah, he's wrong and not wrong at the same time, isn't he? There.
Yeah, but the results are it's unpopular, and we have to decide.
Yeah, statistically, you're wrong.
Patrick, where would you go if I gave you 250 grand right now and I said you've got to have a pair of guns? Where are you going?
I would go to Perazzi.
would you?
And then go on holiday.
Yeah, I'd get the damp that's coming through my bedroom wall sorted after that, and probably still have some change. I hope.
Good. You could buy a day's shooting and take us as well.
Indeed.
Right. So this is the stage in the podcast where we'd normally have our shooting heroes section, but this one's a little bit different, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah. So we get quite a few shooting heroes. And what we loved about this one is that it's basically saying there are loads of people that aren't heroes, and I want to name who they are. So we loved it. Yeah. So he says, I'm quite new to driven game shooting, having not come from a shooting background. By chance, a couple of years ago, I picked up a few guest days on a syndicate nearby in North Yorkshire through a contact made using Guns on Pegs, as it happens. Brownie points there. And I was lucky enough to be invited to join the syndicate the season after. This invite also came with the inevitable list of work days for the off-season. Having now spent a couple of closed seasons with them, it's clear that most shoot members fall into the same categories when these inevitable work days roll around. And he's gone and listed the categories. So he calls them, first of all, the first category, the minibuses. They carry everyone. He then says the next category is the blisters. They only appear when the hard work is done. The noodles, they think all jobs take 2 minutes. The wicket keepers, they put on gloves and stand back. And by far the most common of those in the category of G-spot, because they are never to be found. Is this an issue all syndicates who operate like this face? And what forfeits for the season could be introduced, especially for those in the final category who think turning up to even one is too much? This is, I'm really glad he's brought this up, because this is absolutely an issue in every syndicate I've ever heard of.
What do you think, Patrick? I got to say, it sounds like there's a lot of people on this syndicate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be like one minibus and one blister, a few noodles and a few wicket keepers, and the rest G-spots.
I think those who do actually put the work in on syndicates get so much out of it. Like, even just when I was quite a lot younger, I was on a syndicate where we hardly shot anything, but everyone actually really put quite a lot of effort in. And you sort of, it's quite good to see kind of what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think you'd enjoy it more, wouldn't you? You'd appreciate
completely,
more.
Yeah.
It's like gardening and plants. If you really tend to it, you get a lot out of it when it all comes in bloom and all looks good and stuff. I don't know if that's similarity, but
yeah, it's the satisfaction you get from having tried at something and done it. I made my own game sausages recently, and made the most god awful mess. But they were, and they're probably not the best.
Do they taste good?
Yeah, they are. No, they're really nice. But they're probably not the world's greatest sausages, and they're certainly not the world's most evenly shaped sausages. But yeah, the fact of having done it made me really enjoy the process of eating them as well.
The world's greatest sausage would be quite a thing. That would be a hotly contested.
That's got to happen. That's got to happen. Yeah. So I don't know where that would be, but that's a competition.
I feel like there's probably a competition in Germany, isn't there?
I suspect there is. Yeah, definitely.
Bratwurst
very much like to go.
Munich.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like, buying let days is like buying Gordon's slow gin for the supermarket, and then joining a syndicate and doing your work days is like making your own slow gin. You get a lot more from it.
Very
and
true.
He's saying that there's loads of people in this never to be found category that he labels G-spot.
He's saying quite a lot about his prowess in the bedroom there, isn't he? With that label.
His real question is, what forfeits for the season could be introduced for each of these categories? And we love a forfeit or a fine or similar.
They should always be made to stand at number 9 or number 0.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. The thing with a little syndicate shoot is like peg 4 is never always the best.
No, exactly, because it's so sort of chaotic.
You need like the syndicate captain to be like, right, this, he'll go to the driver and be like, oh, you peg 7 here, but yeah, that's the one. Everyone else might as well go home. We've all been there for that. So they need to decide what the best peg is, and then if you have not been there and rolled your sleeves up on all the work days, you basically can't be that peg, and you have to move aside. I like that.
Yeah, I like it too. Rigged draws. I'm always in favour of rigging the draw.
Yeah. What in what way though?
Well, just either making it so that somebody gets lots of shooting, but more often making sure that somebody gets no shooting. I just think it's funny.
You know, if you've got like a walk one, stand one syndicate, and you've got like an A team and a B team, you get like the guys who sort of, oh, we're going to stand this drive, and the others are, oh, we're going to walk this drive, and you're like, oh, bollocks, I really wanted to walk this drive, because you know there's going to be like loads of woodcock or some widgeon or something getting off a splash. That's exactly where this comes in. It's like, if you don't turn up to the work days, you're never in the right position.
You get to walk the really hilly ones.
The 6 mile blank in. So the point here is like, don't hold back. Be obvious. Like if you're not turning up to the work days, you might as well not bother.
I think the other thing to appreciate is that every syndicate ends up with everyone falling out, and then it has to kind of, every syndicate I've ever known. And my favourite one, I was at a shoot in Wiltshire with the former political editor of the Telegraph was a member of the shoot, and a couple of other sort of journalists and authors and so on. And I was talking about how people always fall out on syndicates. And they said, oh, yeah, it's terrible. That happens here all the time. They said, somebody reviewed somebody else's book and essentially said it was fucking awful. And I was saying to them, well, every syndicate does end in an argument, but not usually an argument quite like that. That's bizarre.
National press-based argument.
Exactly,
You can sort of imagine his writing is almost as bad as his shooting kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's quite funny, really.
Oh, I really enjoy that. Yeah, so basically, don't hold back. Like, people have got to pull their weight, haven't they? Otherwise, the whole system falls apart. But also accept that there's always going to be people who do more than their fair share.
They do more, yeah, exactly. You can't have complete. And also the other thing is, I think that syndicates work best when you have kind of self-aware members. You think, okay, well, they do a hell of a lot of work, so like I'll always do the lunch, or they do a hell of a lot of work, so I'll always provide chipolatas, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. You just hope that these people aren't the ones also turning up for the free lunch as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you always get those people as well. I think pick your syndicate members carefully. That's always a wise.
Oh, it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I'd like to do like a building the perfect syndicate.
Oh yeah, we've done that piece in Shooting Times about 54 times, I think, in the past 10 years.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an original story in our world, is there?
The Shooting Times shoot review template.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Right, so Lazarus, Luigi, Ash, and now Patrick are all members of the most noble order of the Garters and will shortly be in receipt of their very own set of the highly exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock Garters. If you two have a shooting confession, quandary, or query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or if you've got an unpopular opinion and you'd like a set of Garters, do drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. Before we move on, I've got one more piece of correspondence to share. You might remember that back in episode 1 of this series, Dan Cooper from Weber came along and gave us an amazing roe carpaccio recipe, didn't he? And one of our listeners, Stephen Dix, has been in touch, and he wrote, I'm a huge fan of the podcast and often re-listen to my favourite old ones, particularly when I have yet to be converted friends in the car with me. Driving from North London to a sim day near Chichester and then up to Stratford-upon-Avon that afternoon to stay at Mike Robinson's The Woodsman before attending the game fair on Sunday was a perfect example. A fellow gun and my wife were both subjected to several rounds of What's That You're Drinking and Whose Bird Is It Anyway, and are both now eager listeners. My wife in particular enjoyed listening to the Weber cooking segment, so much so that she in fact asked me to defrost a roe loin from the freezer and cook up the carpaccio this weekend. He sent us in some pictures of their efforts, which look pretty amazing. We'll share them on our social media channels. But I'm pretty sure that Steve deserves some Garters for that. Don't you think, Chris?
Absolutely. Anyone that's willing to put in that effort. Yeah. I've seen the pictures as well, and he did a decent job, didn't he?
Yeah, really. It looks really good.
Carpaccio is good stuff, actually.
Yeah,
it's good
really
stuff.
good. And as luck would have it, we've got another recipe from Dan to share now. So have a listen to this, Patrick. Dan, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Hello, it's great to be back.
Good to see you again, Dan. After last time you got my mouth watering big time. I can't wait to hear what you've got for us.
Excellent. Yeah, no, well, I'm very excited about this because this is a recipe that I did a little bit of tweaking to myself, but it was inspired by when I used to live in London, and that doesn't sound very gamey in itself, but down the road from my flat was a sort of kebab shop, if you like, called the Cyprus Mangle, and it was a brilliant place. It had this wonderful big trough of charcoal embers as you walked in. Really small little restaurant with some tables and chairs in the rather sort of dingy back. But one of the things that they would cook there were these grilled quails. Now, they would put a lovely spice seasoning on, which I later learned was the Ras El Hanout, which I'll talk about later on, and it was finished with some pomegranate molasses. Now, I got so inspired by this recipe that I took it back and started to develop it, but I found that it worked even better with partridge. So the way that I do it is I take my partridge and I have a rotisserie for my charcoal barbecue. Now, Weber have rotisserie attachments for almost every single one of our barbecues that we make. So if you have a Weber barbecue, just have a look. You can check out on Weber.com and you'll be able to find the rotisserie attachment for your grill. So I take my partridge and rub it in the Ras El Hanout. This is a pre-made spice mix you can buy in most supermarkets, and it's typical of Morocco or Tunisia, and it's a mixture of cumin and cayenne and cinnamon and all sorts of wonderful exotic spices. So just rub that all over the bird and then roast it indirect, which is where you split the coals either side on the barbecue, and the rotisserie will just gently turn the partridge. And while it's cooking, all those fats on the bird will self-baste it, making it beautifully glistening and crispy skinned. When it's cooked through, I use a little thermometer. I recommend everyone who's barbecuing to get a little digital probe or a thermometer of some sort and just bring the game meat up to around 70 degrees, and then took it off, let it rest, and then finish it with some pomegranate molasses. And this recipe is best served with just simply salad and chips, I think.
Sounds amazing.
That's a good one, isn't it?
It really is.
I was just thinking, because rotisserie, it's not really something that many people do at home, is it? It's not, I wouldn't say it's normal, but it just occurred to me, and when you were explaining it, self-basting, that's something that actually with game, because obviously you can dry it out quite quickly, the way that it would sort of rotate would actually really lend itself quite well to game.
Absolutely, and I love cooking game in this way. I've done pheasants. I do a lot of duck. In fact, I do a lot of duck on my rotisserie. It's one of my favorite ones. And then come Christmas time, I do my turkeys on it. I think that my rotisserie gets almost as much action as just grilling straightforward on the cooking grates. And if you've got, like I said, if you've got a lot of game and you've got a Weber grill, look out for a rotisserie, because it will really help bring some more repertoire into your barbecue menu.
Yeah, I'm just sort of envisaging people now trying to sort of jerry-rig something because they haven't got a rotisserie.
Yeah.
You need a small child to keep the handle turning, don't you?
Well, like I said, going back to the inspiration of this recipe, when I actually first tried it, it was just cooked over charcoal in a spatchcock style. So you could do this in spatchcock, but I think it works best as rotisserie.
Well, I mean, I'm going to have a route through the freezer and see if I can find the last few partridges lurking at the bottom somewhere. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dan, thanks for coming back on. And as I said last time, just listeners, this is a challenge here. George and I are looking for photos. We want to see what gets created. And obviously, if you send something really awesome in, it's going to deserve a bit of a mention. So there'll be garters on their way for anyone that can as well.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to see some pictures as well, definitely. So send them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll also say is if you do send in some pictures of you trying out these recipes, we'll share them on our socials as well, so that everybody else can get a feel for the kind of thing that people are creating. So yeah, great, Dan. Thanks ever so much.
Absolute pleasure. Bye for now.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
So I've got to own up. We recorded that piece and we have inserted it a short while ago. So it's not perfectly live because this isn't just, epic levels of production. And since that piece, I've gone and got myself a Weber Smokefire.
Yeah.
and oh my God, it's opened my eyes to a new way of cooking. It's the pellet grill one that I dreamed of, and it's just unbelievable the way it cooks. Like so
They
different.
used to have in medieval kitchens. They used to have this little type of dog that's called like a Spitzhund that would run and keep the rotisserie turning. But the type of dog has now become extinct. But if any listeners have like a small cocker spaniel,
Yeah, you just need to rig up a sausage on a string kind of thing, just
a
in
bit of a
front of it.
violation of animal welfare laws, I'm sure. But I think you get 100 garters at least if you could.
It doesn't count as exercising.
It does sound good though, that doesn't it?
So I'm going online tonight and buying myself a rotisserie, and I'm giving that a go. And as that was a couple of weeks ago, we've now got some partridges coming up, and that is happening here at home. So exciting. Makes my mouth water, that.
Yeah, well, nearly supper time. Right. I think we should talk about this book, don't you?
I do. I really want to get into this.
Yeah. So, Patrick, Chris and I have both read your book. I can't speak for Chris, but I, as I've said to you before, absolutely loved it. And what I want to ask, what was it that you were hoping to achieve when you set out to write the book?
I sort of think in a way that I don't really like setting out to achieve anything when I'm writing. That to me feels as though you're going in search then of a pre sort of imagined story. I just kind of, I want to have an idea, but then, so the idea was, that I had these 10 birds that I wanted to learn more about, and I wanted to know why they're going and what they mean to people. But sort of from that point, it's a kind of following your nose sort of situation. So, for example, with The Bittern, that chapter started up on a roof with a thatcher. And the thatcher said to me that for 4 generations, their family have got reed from a family in North Norfolk. So 4 generations of Dodson have got their reed from 4 generations of Randall. Now, people who manage reed beds essentially sustain bittern habitat. So you're just kind of going on this journey to try and find this person. So I spent 2 weeks in Norfolk waiting till I could see this guy, Henry Randall, and I found him sort of 10 miles inland because he'd been priced out of the North Norfolk coast as a reed cutter. So that's just a good example of sort of not so much setting out to try and find something, it's just sort of seeing what there is to find and seeing how that all kind of comes together as a story or doesn't. And I think you've got to be really... You've got to accept when you go out to write something that you're going to write what you find. And if that's sort of hard for you to do as somebody who writes about other things or somebody who's involved in a community or a group of people, then fine. You've got to be prepared to do that.
I'm keen to understand actually on that exact point. Now that you've published it and lots of people have had a chance to read it, what's the reaction been like? Because I mean, it can be divisive.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I at the game fair, I was walking towards our stand, and there was a man there holding the book who'd loved it and wanted me to sign it. He latterly tracked me down, and there was a woman shouting at him because he was holding a copy of this book. And and I later spoke to him, and he said that she was really angry about the chapter that explores raptor persecution, or part of that chapter explores raptor persecution, the Hen Harrier chapter. Yeah, and this man said that he said to this lady, but it's a book that sort of confronts hard truths, and she sort of accepted that, but felt that it wasn't something that the field sports community should be doing. On the flip side, the publisher had quite a lot of correspondence from a couple of conservationists who didn't want the book to be published, and their feeling is that the views of gamekeepers shouldn't really be aired, or should be aired sparingly. But essentially, they felt that I'd spent far too much time with keepers in the course of writing this book, and that a mainstream publisher shouldn't be sort of sullying themselves by involving themselves with a person like me. So, I mean, it's sort of fascinating.
I wanted to ask about that actually, because it, as you say, it's published by HarperCollins, right?
Yeah,
not a traditional field sports publisher. I'm sure that if you'd gone to one of the sort of field sports publishing houses, it would have been a breeze to get published. I'm sure it wasn't too much of a challenge in anyway. But did you feel like it was a bit of a victory getting it published by what you might call a mainstream publisher?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's right. What's really interesting is that 25, 30 years ago, publishers like HarperCollins and Faber were publishing all sorts of shooting books. Often books on how to shoot more pigeons or grouse shooting for beginners or how to be a better grouse keeper. So that's quite interesting. But then I think what I've also found really interesting is that there were a few conservationists and rewilders who were really sort of up in arms. There were a few kind of people within the industry who were like, hang on a second, we shouldn't be airing our dirty washing, as it were. But then the kind of literary press have just said, like, what a fantastic book. And actually, interestingly, some sort of the more kind of radical literary press have praised the book for going out there and talking to people who aren't ordinarily listened to. And I think that's really fascinating. And that actually is what I wanted to do, I suppose, was to go and speak to these people who know so much. But, that Thatcher, for example, I saw him in Norfolk not long ago, and he said to me that, talking to him about Bittins meant a lot to him because he feels that people don't really listen to people like him because he doesn't have a degree, he doesn't have a master's degree and so on.
In that sense, is the title, does that have a dual meaning? The song of the bird and the stories of these people who don't get listened to, that you might never get those stories out of people.
Yeah, no, I think so, definitely. And understanding the ways in which people's sort of sense of identity is kind of created through their relationship with birds, I think is really interesting. And also, there's a lot of talking to poets in the book and writers and artists whose work is inspired by these birds. So I suppose as well, the book was trying to understand what we'd be set to lose culturally if these birds went.
Yeah. I found that chapter you've alluded to on the hen harrier, to be honest, out of all the chapters that I knew were in there, even before you published it, that was the one I really wanted to read the most because of obviously what we do as a job and the fact that it gets so much airtime.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because you interview someone in that chapter whose name's gone from me. It's escaped me for a second, but he's quite. Didn't he? He'd done some time.
Luke Steele.
Luke
yeah,
Steele,
yeah.
That's it. Yeah. But and you get some absolute extreme opinion, but I just found it really interesting because we've got different motivations, but there is middle ground in this.
Yeah, there is. Even with people who Luke's done time and a fair bit of time. But he's a very thoughtful person and he's sort of moving towards the center ground. And I think he does have a lot of passion for the natural world. And it's often the things that he's saying are actually quite similar to things that are being said elsewhere by, and also, one thing I was really interested in with that book, and I've been thinking a lot about it, is how we treat gamekeepers, and in the past, what gamekeepers. So gamekeepers are, to me, on the front line of conservation, but sort of we sometimes collectively, as an industry, as a sport, haven't allowed them to be as effective as they could be because they're sort of they're working too hard. Essentially, they are putting on too many days. They could be doing. So that was a really interesting element of that chapter. I
sort of we've touched on it slightly, but it is a very balanced book, and you do try and go out of your way to talk to both sides. There's that stat, isn't there? Whenever people talk about BBC bias, and when they do the research, they find that people on the left think it's got right-wing bias, and people on the right think it's got.
And that's exactly what happened with the sort of extremes of the
So I want. Is there anybody you haven't upset with the book?
Me.
There were some people who I thought would, and I don't like to. I like to talk to all sorts of people. That's really what I don't like to upset people. Mark Avery loved the book, who of course founded Wild Justice. And he's sort of very pally with Chris Packham. Chris Packham was tweeting about the book, which it's a book that sort of extols the virtues of snaring at points through other people's work. But so it does so much that I think it would be hard to love all of it or hard to agree with everything that's said. but also it would be hard to sort of hate every part of it as well.
Did Mark Avery love the book because he should love the book because it's good to be building bridges type thing, even though Wild Justice doesn't ever intend to build bridges? But you kind of know what I mean. From a PR point of view, it makes him look a little bit more friendly if he says he loves the book. Or, you know, do you think he's absolutely being genuinely honest there?
I mean, I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night, so I'll ask him. I was saying to him, I hope they're going to have grouse on the menu. I think, and I don't want to, I think that working together is quite in vogue, and that he sort of recognizes that and wants to kind of get on board with that a little bit more. Because in the past, and look, I've written things in the past that I wish I hadn't written. And I've written for people in the past who don't know anything about field sports, but who wanted me to write for them and to sort of stir up, essentially. You know, don't you think it's awful that, you know, woke people think this about shooting? And sort of my visceral reaction is actually, hang on a second, like, do they? But that's not really how journalism works. So this book sort of books, long form allows nuances. And I mean, you know, there are quite a few ornithologists, birders, ecologists who have tweeted in a public forum, but also who've said to me that actually, you know, reading this book makes them think that, you know, they could work with shooting. I think particularly because I talk to grey partridge keepers and wild bird keepers and so on, and also people involved in shooting who are doing things to do with lapwings and so on. But that's what I really wanted to do. So that's not really answering your question, but.
No, but it makes me think though, when you think about the community that are on the supposed other side of us, and the thing I hate the most is they sort of somehow get to call themselves conservationists, which is just wrong in every sense of the level, in that we're all conservationists. I think there are aspects of their side that are certainly not conservationists, they're one-dimensional.
Yeah.
And there's aspects of our side that are one-dimensional, they're not conservationists. Yeah. But the overlap must be
it
massive.
Is, yeah. And I also, one thing that I found really interesting is that, you know, I didn't write this book as like, hello, I'm the editor of Shooting Times, can we talk about this? It was like, hey, can we talk about this? Because I do a lot of other things and I don't see myself solely as the editor of Shooting Times. Occasionally I go and spend all day with somebody, often quite kind of politically radical people with whom I sort of really get on and agree with them on lots of things we sort of discovered. And at the end of the day, they would say, oh, and you edit Shooting Times. And they would say, oh, my uncle used to read Shooting Times, or I used to read Shooting Times when I was young. And what I became very aware of in the course of writing this book is that great gulf, as it were, I think is a relatively new thing. So, you know, not that long ago, people collected birds' eggs and people were into wildfowling, or that uncle might have been into wildfowling, and that was how they sort of got into field sports. So that's a really interesting thing, I think. And the more we can talk about the crossover, and the more we can work with people who sort of have similar aims, then the more we'll achieve.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You travelled around a fair bit for this, and we've already talked about being in the dunes, wasn't it? On Uist and
on the Macca.
So you put the miles in. You met a huge range of really interesting people. Of all the people who you spoke to, and of all the locations that you went to, who were the
most interesting
which were
people?
the places that sort of stood out as who really made an impression on you?
I think the lapwing chapter that sort of starts in Rochdale. Lapwings, which are wading birds, which are in sort of dire decline, used to roost there on the roofs of old mills because we sort of built on their roosting sites outside of town. So they had to kind of take refuge on what we've left behind. And then I spent a day on the Mosses, which is just outside Manchester, with a guy who's campaigning to essentially get sort of the lapwing recognised as the official bird of Trafford, and he's got all of these campaigns to get. And I just thought it's really sort of wonderful, kind of like guerrilla conservation almost. And there's a lot of anti-fracking stuff that comes into that as well. So that was really wonderful. And then at the end of that chapter, I go and see Charles Grisdale, who runs a duck shoot, but is also a kind of, he's done more for lapwings than anybody else in Wales, and he has probably the last breeding population of lapwings in Wales. And those two guys, I think, would have very different views on lots of things, but they're both people who have dedicated their lives to trying to save the same bird. And I found a lot of what they've got to say really quite moving. And when I read it back, I find it sort of...
I love that chapter. I thought you're absolutely right. The similarities between those two, and I can imagine sitting in the pub watching them chat, being like at first like wanting to punch each other type thing, but actually realizing they should be bezies. I really can see that. And actually, the background of that chap you're talking about was really interesting. Going to raves and then sort of going to watch the birds first light type thing. It's mad, absolutely mad, but it just shows you that there is so much ground in all of this.
Yeah, no, definitely. I came away from it feeling really despondent about the state of nature in the UK, but also just so overwhelmed by the passion and love that people have for wildlife. And that's right from, the end of the book, I think, I forget now, it's so long ago, but Lindsay Waddell, that grousekeeper, and he sits there talking about why he cares so much. And he sort of thinks very deeply, and then he says that, he's had things in the palm of his hand, insects and eggs and chicks and things. And it's really, I find it, occasionally people tweet at me saying, just been reading your book, and I'm in tears now. As I say, they're sort of angry or, thanks, mate. But no, there is. I was really inspired by people's efforts, certainly.
I was intrigued about what you just said about it making you quite despondent, because I got that too. I sort of slammed the book down on my sun lounger once whilst I was on holiday, and I said to my wife, I was like, we humans have just fucked this all right up.
It's catastrophic. But there's a lady in the book, Katrina Porteous, who's a really, really brilliant poet, and she talks about being a fatalist essentially, and sort of the great gifts that capitalism has given us, but at the same time, it's destroyed sort of everything that she writes about, and it's a really difficult tension there. I think one thing that I'm really interested in is the way in which I think a lot of nature writing can be quite simplistic. Like, all we have to do is this, and this, and then we'll get the birds back. And that's not, and actually often nature writing doesn't involve people, because as soon as you start involving people, it becomes a lot harder.
Yeah, that's a bit like that Yellowstone wolves thing. All you've got to do is bring back the wolves and everything will be fine again.
Oh, it just makes you want to shoot yourself.
But I also think it's interesting that people sort of think that, and there's a guy in the book, I actually had a dream quite recently that I was talking to him again, and he lives at a new age community called Findhorn. And he said to me, when we'd been walking around together talking about trees, he set up a charity that sort of tries to restore forestry. He said to me that, you understand, don't you, that what we really need is love. And that sounds sort of pretty woo-woo, but actually I kind of like think that is sort of the point that the book moves to, is that if people could talk to each other more, and sort of talking as an act of love maybe, then I think there would be more reason for hope.
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle on it. So you spoke to people with very differing views, possibly from your own, on a lot of subjects.
Yes.
Did anybody change your mind, or did you change anybody's mind? I know you probably didn't set out to change anybody's mind, but...
Yeah, well, definitely. Everybody said things that made me think. And that was one of them, and the thing that Katrina Porteous was saying about sort of fatalism was another. I don't have particularly strong views on things, other than that I think we should listen to each other, and that we should sort of try to not be... sort of entrenched in our positions. There was a couple of people have said, that book is fine, but Patrick Galbraith doesn't commit to any sort of position, and therefore I don't really know what I'm meant to think of the book, because, but that's sort of the point. And I don't.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to. I'm not. It's not a polemic. I'm not trying to convince people one way or the other of anything. And I think writing kind of fails when it does that. So yeah, my views were changed. I don't really have that many views.
Just bringing it back to shooting for a second.
All roads.
especially on this podcast.
Yeah, especially the shooting podcast. I found myself reflecting a lot on, I don't know, us as a business, what we do, what I enjoy, based on sort of what I was reading. Has it has it made you? Well, I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, has it made you think about what shooting needs to do in order to remain or become even more sustainable, just last forever?
That's partly perhaps what I wanted to do at some point in the process, was to challenge myself, not in terms of my views, but about what I do. And I do think that, if we want to get grey partridges back in a meaningful way from the sort of brink of extinction that they're teetering on in lots of places, then putting down lots and lots of redlegs isn't the way to go. The book sort of, and I wanted to be sure, I think, of and having conversations with like Gerald Gray, for example, the old grey partridge keeper at Hillborough. He says that quite often they would get people who would come to shoot the grey partridges, and they would say, "Oh, we used to have lots of greys," and he would say to them, "And did you have redlegs when you had lots of greys?" And they would say, "No, and we now shoot twice a week, and we used to shoot twice a year." Saying, "Well, that's your answer." So I think I do think that keepers are part of the puzzle in terms of nature restoration, and sort of empowering them to be as effective as they can possibly be is something that I think we really need to do.
The frustrating thing about that particular part is that it kind of, in my mind anyway, it always comes back to money.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And the thing is that keepers used to be paid next to nothing. And if you were a sort of underkeeper, you'd possibly go off to the workhouse at the end of, so it's like, how do you, and the sort of people aren't as wealthy as they once were, and as I say, labor costs more. So but I do think that, and it's so complex, but I was with some guys at Bright Seeds today who were just saying that the conservation side of their business is absolutely booming. They said, farmers are coming in and saying, look, I've got, X thousand acres, and I want to put 1,500 acres, down as wildflowers because of grants to do so. So I think that there will be places where shooting becomes a byproduct of conservation, not where we're sort of doing a bit of conservation to slightly greenwash maybe what we're doing in a way, which is the case in some places, undeniably. So I think, the future is bright if we can love each other more, as that guy was saying at that New Age community. Not a keen shot, that man.
I feel like I need a spliff now.
I find that whole concept absolutely...
What's that you're smoking?
That's a whole other podcast that I think you and I might have to start, Patrick.
I find that whole concept about farmers suddenly putting down thousands of acres of wildflower. I mean, it's going to be awesome. It's slightly... given the year that we're now in, when actually, suddenly we need to be slightly more self-sufficient than we were, it's sort of slightly more divisive. But like, take 2 years ago, payment by results and all that sort of stuff, it's lending itself, because we are an importing nation, but it's lending itself absolutely perfectly to shooting. And wildlife is just going to benefit so much if we do go down that route. I don't know if we do need to be self-sufficient that much. Different debate, but it could be awesome, couldn't it? Can you imagine grey partridge levels in some places without even meaning to be that way?
I think the next 5 years are really critical. Critical for conservation and critical for shooting as part of that. And it's kind of time that it's shooting's opportunity really to show how effective a part of the jigsaw it can be.
I went to a shot at Catton Hall. Quite a few people will know it. Quite a big shoot, really, and they've got. It's an incredible project they've got on the go there. They've had all sorts of grants for this, that, and the other, and there's so much wildflower everywhere. It was originally, plots of woodland planted for shooting, which you talk about in the book as well, but then they've got wildflower everywhere, and they've got all these sort of river projects going on, the rest of it, and the place is it's a joy to be at because of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. There were guys saying that today. Occasionally, the keepers I was talking to today, I didn't even really get their names, but they were really like on it with and they were saying that one of the things they like about having sort of wild flower mixes rather than just maize is that when people go to shoot there, they see all of these little birds, and it just looks much prettier. And a guy called Mike Swan, Dr. Mike Swan of the GWCT, was saying to me that he wants to do a piece about identifying the little Tweety birds, as he put it in his sort of very kind of self-effacing way, that people see on a shoot, because that's really cool. And if people can, did you see those yellow hammers or whatever, or did you see those linnets or whatever? They're not
all just really LBJs, are they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I agree. That's always something I sort of ask shoots, and I do understand. Maize is probably still the dominant crop that's going to deliver easy returns on your shoot, and it's super simple and all the
Done
rest.
very poorly this year because of how dry it's been.
Indeed, but it is just so one-dimensional, isn't it? And we've got to look at that because that's a risk, as it were, in terms of sustainability.
Yeah.
Well, I do encourage anyone to read this book if you.
Well, put it in the show notes. Put the link in the show
absolutely will.
notes.
And I think you were saying at the Game Fair, Patrick, that you make more money if people get the audiobook, right?
That is true. And they can listen to me reading it, which is,
I can't believe you
bad thing.
read. How long did it take you to read the whole thing back?
Took me 3 days. And here's a really good point. Okay, the guy who was doing it, the audio guy, was like this sort of geezer wearing like a different American football shirt every day. And then at the end of it, he's like, "Oh, I love red stag stalking. Me and my dad and my mates go every year." And it's just like that is classic. In places you least expect.
That's
fantastic.
so good.
And I just thought he was not enjoying it at all. And he was like, "No, I was really into that." And
anybody listening to this podcast, there's a fair chance that you also like an audiobook. And I am a dyed-in-the-wool audiobook fan. And sometimes the author reading their own work isn't great. This is not one of the cases. I can highly recommend.
I am actually. The guy said, "You know what? You're really good at this." And there's somebody who, I don't often get people telling me that I'm really good at things I haven't done before. And there's lots of things like table tennis that I would love to be good at, and BMX that I'm not good at. So I walked out of Shoreditch, the recording studio, every day feeling wonderful. So
I highly recommend the audiobook. Chris, I think you read it in
I read it in old school format with my glasses on. Yeah. So Patrick, where is it you get the most margin if people buy this? Do Amazon screw you over?
Amazon do. Waterstones is always good. But audiobook is good, and I imagine lots of your listeners listen because they spend lots of time in the car, going shooting or driving off to do whatever it is that they do, maybe something agricultural. So audiobook works really well.
Yeah.
Get both. Get a hard copy for your grandma for Christmas or your grandfather. Or pre-order the paperback. Get the Kindle.
I've got 2 copies. I've got one signed copy by you with your handwriting, which is barely legible. Which
that's true. It's really embarrassing, actually. People say to me, "Oh, you write so beautifully. Can you sign this?" And it's like, oh.
Like
you've done it with your foot.
Yeah, exactly,
I'm not joking. It looks like that.
Yeah, it's terrible. I need to work on that,
actually. Good. Well, look.
Thank you very much, guys.
Well, before you go, Patrick, since you last came on, we've got this new feature. It's not new at all anymore. It's been a while since you've been on. It's called Desert Island Shooting, and basically, one last day. Shooting's going to be banned tomorrow. I hate saying that, but anyway, let's just assume it was going the day after tomorrow. Where would it be for this one last day? Money's no object. Time isn't an issue. Travel, whatever. You can do what you like. Who would you have with you? Where would you go?
So this year I'm going up to the Outer Hebrides to shoot grouse over one reasonably well-behaved golden setter. And I've been going up with the same group of guys for like years now, since we were like early 20s. And it's not very expensive, but it's really good fun. And it's probably sort of, people often say, "Oh, it's a great shoot. It's an hour from London." And I think that's not, I really want to go somewhere. I want to do kind of 3 days. I want lots of hangovers. I want to have that feeling of waking up slightly hungover and thinking, "Where the fuck am I?" And you look out the window and you think, "Shit, this is amazing. This is beautiful. It's kind of lunar." So that would be definitely the Outer Hebrides for sort of wild, very sustainable, walked up stuff, mixed bag.
Perfect.
So this is a classic desert island shooting that you can do perfectly legitimately and actually not that expensive in the grand.
And it is kind of a desert island, although not a desert. So
far from it.
It works. It works. Yeah.
Although there are those who would have you believe that Heather Moreland is a desert.
That is true. That is true.
That pops up in the book as well.
Yes.
Very good.
Excellent.
And very enjoyable. Good to have you on, and thanks for coming, Patrick.
Thank you very much.
Final question. How does your second appearance compare with your first?
I'll let others judge. I think I can't remember what I was drinking. I think it was some really horrible like cider or something. So this cocktail, I know, I've got to go off to a drinks party. I feel quite drunk.
It was McEwen's No, tenants.
We're gonna be-
Tenants.
Tenants. Oh god.
No.
I really.
That surely did it? I descended that low. Did someone else?
Yeah, no, Patrick had.
Well, me. Well, I've really moved up in the world.
It's because you went to school up in Scotland. You're going back to your roots. You're sitting behind the bus stop.
yeah. I'm sitting here in my kilt. You can't see it. But... All right, thanks, guys.
Cheers, Patrick. Thanks ever so much for coming along. Right, so before we go, as per usual, there is one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sending us your unpopular opinions, nominating your shooting heroes, or by getting in touch to let us know where you've been listening. Also, if you do give that rotisserie partridge recipe a try, let us know, send us some pictures. We'd really like to see them. Drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read any of it out in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters. We will be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode, but until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.